Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Builder Nation. For today's that we have Trevor Bennett, co-founder of Starfish Space, a software robotics and autonomous space infrastructure company performing satellite servicing missions. So welcome, Trevor, one more time. Super happy to have you here.
Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me on, for sure.
Okay, so in order to start, I wanted to ask you, I know that you're an aerospace engineer and that you work at NASA for a while. So why the interest in founding your own company?
Yeah, absolutely. Why the interest? Because I think small companies and startups and actually entrepreneurs in general, the ones that get to change the world. They have a very big lever and they get to take on the risk that maybe others don't get to. And that's an exciting place to be. I think as many founders might point to their key moments in their life that lead them down this path. And as my co-founder Austin would like to say, maybe there are a few more of those in my past than others, which I feel very fortunate about. I remember selling trinkets and things as an elementary school kid to my neighbors as part of this. And little did I know that was going to be a sign of things to come. And then also as an engineer, usually you get paired through undergrad and grad school with like-minded individuals. And it was amusing to me that every time I had one of those matching programs with roommates, it was always a business major. Never once did I get matched with an engineer, which I found both interesting and strange as an engineer to be kind of put into those groups. And then also feel just very fortunate as well to have parents that kind of encourage that process, encourage that discovery, and peers and colleagues that were also just enthusiastic with where the world was going. Kind of grew up in an age of robotics in many ways, got to watch landings on Mars to go discover what our neighboring planets were like. Got to see kind of the age of the space shuttle in many ways as well. And so got to see big rockets take big things to orbit and the beautiful images of Hubble and others. And so this was really kind of a catalyst for a variety of different things that said, you know what, the future can be there. Hearing the voice of Gene Roddenberry through others, that space is the final frontier, right? This is the place that we can go and actually make some huge waves and make a big difference.
How did you and your co-founder meet? I know that Austin.
Yeah, so Austin and I actually both came from a company called Blue Origin before this. And so Blue Origin is one of the rocket companies that's out there trying to make big rockets and get a lot of things to space. He and I were both attracted to the same vision at different times, this kind of millions of people living and working in space. And that was something that we got excited about. And what was amusing to me was actually showing up on my first day of Blue Origin. They have a mentor guide for the company that says, joining any new company is going to be an interesting experience. There's a lot to learn that's not just on the paper or what the job that you've been trained to do. You have to know where the bathrooms are. You have to know who to talk to about the things that you're working on. Where are the social events? How do you reach out to certain people? What are the cultural norms? And fortunately, Blue Origin set up a thing called a Blue Guide. And turns out Austin was my Blue Guide. And so he and I, from day one, had started working together. He helped kind of introduce me to Blue Origin. We worked tightly on a bunch of engineering projects over the course of a couple of years. And of course, when you're working that closely with anybody, you start thinking about what more could we do together? And maybe it's Thanksgivings at each other's houses. Maybe that's actually going and building space tugs. And so it really kind of came together as a friendship and a partnership in a way that allowed us kind of the trust that you really need as co-founders. It allowed us the kind of the dreaming that we had and the storytelling that we had together. We got to practice that and think through that and really know how we work together for a couple of years before having to go off on this endeavor. And I think that's actually been a real strength for us.
Trust is super important. And also the connection that you guys need to have in order to found a company. Yeah. And talking about the beginnings of the company of a Starfish, do you remember what was the first idea that you ever pitched, and how do you get your first investors?
Yeah, I'll tell you a couple of stories there. We'll get to the one that you're really curious about, which is what Starfish was as a company. But before that, we actually, as engineers do, pulled up a spreadsheet in our respective houses and said, you know what, let's put down the ideas of what things that we could actually do as a company in general. And among these were things like YouTube personalities and let's go build space hardware in different components. And that being said, it was kind of a creative process for us that we went through. And so we had a couple of ideas of what would make sense. And notably among that list was satellite manufacturing, satellite recycling, assembly, basically the things that we take for granted here on the terrestrial environment was missing from space. And we saw maybe now is the right time for that. There are a couple things that are starting to move. There's enthusiasm about space. There's an ability to access space in unprecedented ways. Companies like SpaceX and Blue and others were launching satellites at an unprecedented rate and continue to do so. And then there was also funding in the markets and an optimistic view of the future. And so it seemed like a coalescing of a few things were all starting to work together for us. And so we go, and now to your question, we go to some of the investors and we say, we think we can go and harvest satellites that are in orbit that are just defunct. We'll be space recyclers. And they say, that's very cool. Who's going to pay for it? Like, oh, good question. So you have to go back to the drawing board and you think through, okay, well, this is who's going to pay for it. And so we say, okay, we actually think that transportation is going to be the key to all this. And they say, excellent. How much can you make per year? Like, okay, well, sure, let's do this. And we figure out how much we can make per year. And then we go and we do this pitch and we say, we think we can make millions of dollars a year doing this business. And we were told at the time, that's very exciting. But if I had known that, I might not have taken this meeting, because what venture capitalists want to see is trillion-dollar markets or billion-dollar markets. They want to see so many zeros after that it's worth the small chance that you're going to succeed to go bet on these big futures. And that was really kind of the catalyst moment for us, because we were able to say, the focal point for venture capital money coming in and the focal point for really making a big change is seeing, can we quantify or at least appreciate how large of an effect we can exert on the space industry? And that was, I think, kind of what that first pitch experience was really all about, was learning for us what it meant to be a startup company in the eyes of a VC, and also what it meant to be a startup company in the eyes of a commercial industry that would have expectations about not just the prices that you were going to charge and the value that you were going to add, but your process to close the gap between where you are as a couple of guys hanging out in the library to actually people flying things in space and providing a real service. It always comes down to those that are willing to say, the next great idea can come from anywhere. Let's engage, let's talk about it, let's encourage, and sometimes just share perspectives, and that can be candid perspectives of this is not going to work. But it might also be a perspective like, you know what, I actually know somebody who's going to be more interested in this. Let me introduce you to them and hand you off. And those little moments are the ones that become the inflection points of a company that can really go realize a dream.
Wow. So yeah, especially I think being a space startup, probably a couple of years ago, that was a little harder. But I'm glad, because every experience like leads to where you guys are now. So I'm glad that it somehow worked out. I mean, it has worked out definitely. So
it continues to work out so far. You know, there's still a lot of things to go do in the future here. And I think that's part of the draw, right? You ask like, why this startup or why we go down this road. I think it really does come down to the excitement that the future has in store for us. And that's worth trying to realize on a day-to-day basis.
Now I have some technical questions that I do not quite understand, but probably our audience does, because it's filled with engineers. Okay, so I saw the website that you guys have like this other servicing vehicle.
Correct.
So I'm curious to ask, like, how does it work? And I have a second question regarding this, that it talks about, you know, like it somehow cleans up the space, like the jump from space. So how does that work?
Yeah, great question. I think this is something that we are always juggling at Starfish, is how to best convey this complex message, right? For somebody who, like myself, who's very classically trained in orbital mechanics, I think in circles, I think in ellipses, I think in all these crazy geometries, and that doesn't translate to what actually is of value, right? And that value comes down to what Otter is bringing to the table. We see ourselves as a transportation and autonomy infrastructure layer for a bunch of industries. First and foremost, if we think about lanes of traffic on a highway, a bunch of cars are moving in a particular direction. Everybody wants to get to work. The cars are all different ages and makes and designs and models. And then what we value as part of an industry and part of ourselves is that there's a tow truck if something ever goes wrong. That if a car breaks down in the center lane of a highway, a tow truck can just pull it off to the side. Everybody else can continue their business. And that tow truck could then take it over to a mechanic and repair the car, and then you're back on the road. And that allows you, and many others, an opportunity to operate their car at various levels of life for various people. You can gift it to your son or daughter to go let them drive their first car, or you go get your new one, or you're able to drive a car until the wheels literally fall off, because it provides that opportunity. And that whole spectrum of use is only afforded by an infrastructure that's there for moving your car out of the way if there's ever an issue, and the mechanics in your area that can help fix your car. Now let's kind of extrapolate this to space a little bit. Space in these orbits, you can think of them as lanes of traffic. Everybody designs their desired place to go because it provides the best view from space or the best connectivity if you're flying across your transatlantic flight or you're sitting at home watching Netflix. There's a satellite there that can help provide some of that telecommunication for you, or takes a picture of crops to help make sure that the crops are actually going to provide the yield that they're expecting so that we can make sure that it transports the people that need it. All of these things design specific layers and specific lanes of traffic in space. Some lanes of traffic are more valuable than others. Specifically, there's a couple that stand out, and we can kind of bring these to the conversation here. One is an orbit we call geostationary. And the simple way of thinking of this is it's an orbit that the satellite goes around the Earth in the same amount of time the Earth spins. And so it just takes 24 hours for the satellite to orbit and the Earth to spin in 24 hours. And so it actually looks like it's stationary. It's always like hovering above. And these are the big satellites that provide the game day footage and provide the persistent coverage that people like. And then there's another layer called low Earth orbit. And this is where the space station is. This is where most satellites get launched to. And it's only a few hundred kilometers above. Like if you were to, Neil deGrasse Tyson likes to describe it this way. There's a satellite globe in your classroom, and there's just like a paint layer that sits on top of the globe. That's almost how close we are orbiting in many cases. It's just like centimeters off, fractions of a centimeter off this Earth in terms of size. And that's where the Hubble sits. That's where space station sits. All of these big endeavors that people are talking about often are in this belt. And those are increasingly congested environments, right? We're building extra lanes of traffic because people are building parallel roads and other things to make sure they can stay there. Now, as we continue to use space, as we continue to benefit from those, it all comes back down to this car example. What happens if a satellite gets old? Do we have anything that we can do with it? Right now, the metric is take your car off to the side of the road, leave it there, buy a new car. And that's a crazy model for how satellites work. But up until now, that's the only option that people have had. And so now in these really high value places where we're building these lanes of traffic in space to do all these interesting things, we can bring in the tow truck, we can bring in the mechanic, and that's what Otter can do. Otter is a first generation spacecraft that allows us to actually grab satellites and move them around in orbit, whether that's to keep them in service so they can keep operating, or get them out of the way so that other satellites can continue to operate. And that's what we think of as satellite servicing as an industry. And what that builds for you is a fundamental layer of what we like to call in the industry of OSAM or ISAM, which is an acronym, but it stands for In-Space Assembly, Servicing, and Manufacturing. And so that means now you can build spacecraft in orbit. You can make space stations out of smaller pieces. You can start recycling components because you have the ability to grab and move parts of spacecraft around. And if you can do that, now you have all this interesting capability to go do much bigger things like assemble giant telescopes to look deeper into the cosmos, or build space stations so people can go visit that on holiday. These are all the things that start to become realizable once you have the Otter in place to do that initial transportation.
So what would you say that makes Starfish different?
Yeah, I think what makes Starfish different is we're really focused on two things, and that is making it affordable and making it available. And those are the two things that really are a game changer for the industry. In any industry, and I think you'll find this amongst founders, you'll find this amongst companies, even simple products that we use in our household, you have to try something first to prove that it's even possible. And then the phase after that is, okay, once it's possible, let's make it something that everybody can adopt and use. And I think that's where we kind of are as part of the industry. There have been a couple examples either through government programs like NASA's missions or a couple other commercial companies that have shown that you can actually bring two spacecraft together and dock, but it's not affordable yet. And it's not at an Uber, like a space Uber. Wouldn't it be great to have, you could text an Otter and an Otter will come pick you up? That's really what we need to get to. And so that's what really makes Starfish unique, is having key technologies and kind of a business model that makes us affordable and available to actually make the spacecraft at a price point that people can use and actually adopt a space Uber or a space tow truck.
So you guys are focused on building hardware and software, both of them. So
Correct.
I'm curious to ask, like, talking about the hardware, did you have any problems when it comes to the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's always challenges with building hardware when you are trying to keep people separate. I think fortunately for Starfish, we were at a phase where some of that hardware just lived in a specific person's house. We had one guy in Baltimore who had part of our satellite hardware. We had another guy here in Seattle who had another component of our hardware, and it was able to we, fortunately in the internet age, we can connect to it, and myself and our guy Brendan were able to talk back and forth via chat, as well as simultaneously be logged into the same piece of hardware, even though it's sitting in his living room. We were also a small company at the time. I think we only 4 or 5 people cutting through most of the heavy lockdown phase. Now at a point where, as you commented at the beginning, we're back in the office in many ways. We have adopted a hybrid model in which a couple of days we're in, a couple of days is remote. But for hardware, it allows people to come in and do what they need to do in that office environment and have a space to work. Space is a complex environment that requires a fair bit of tooling and a fair bit of environmental testing. And so that includes things like a vacuum chamber, which means you can suck all the air out and actually simulate what it's like to have no air in space. So these are some of the tests that we do and some of the things that we can do in the office type environment. And fortunately now, I think as the pandemic has released some of that hold on us, so we're able to kind of do that testing in earnest with a little more ease than we have in the past.
And I mean, talking about the challenges that you have been through, what would you say has been the biggest technical challenge that you have ever faced and managed to solve?
Yeah, so worth caveating that all of our technical challenges are relative, right? When you're 2 people and you're thinking about building a whole satellite, right? There's so many technical challenges to lay out, and something that could be easily solved by a team of 10 is going to be harder to solve with a team of 2. What has been interesting for us to date is how do we iterate quickly? And I think that's something that the space industry is warming up to. And a technical challenge for us has always been, how fast can we go? Right. And it really kind of takes a change in mindset. And what's amusing is the technical challenge was not solved by here's a better test. It was, let's set up a process that allows us to go and work through technical challenges. And so I think a slight twist on your question there, what really has been beneficial for us is a mentality around testing early and testing often. And so some of the things that we've been taking little bets on is we think the way we do our software is something unique. The way we do our hardware is something unique, but it's really the technical challenge for us has always been, how can we frame the current test that we're doing to be the most informative with the least amount of effort?
How long have you had it with the company?
Yeah, so we founded in October of 2019, and we thought that was a great time, as we've described, right? And amusingly enough, Austin and I were at a conference out in DC, Washington, DC in March of 2020. And while we were at that conference, the US decided that we should lock down. And so we actually got earlier flights out.
And last but not least, I have 2 remaining questions.
Please.
The first one is that, do you have an estimated time for launching?
I do have an estimated time for launch, and I'll ask you to tune in tomorrow if you're viewing this today. One of the things I can share that we have done, Starfish has already found its way to space. Even in late 2020, as part of the pandemic, and early 2021, we actually found another company that was already going to space and their satellite, and we actually put some of our software on board their spacecraft. And so one of the cool things that, as we were talking about a couple threads here, the maturity of the industry was the right timing for us. One of those technical challenges that we were able to overcome was we don't really have a lot of money and a lot of resources as a small company to go get to space, but partnering with another company that's also another startup thinking about this, we were able to share like a much more affordable way to space. And actually Starfish has operated software on orbit already. Last
but not least, do you have any advice for future entrepreneurs starting on this space path?
Sure. I have 2 pieces of advice. One's from a little personal note, and that is when starting Starfish, I think it was equal parts ignorance and excitement. There's a lot of ignorance as to what is going to be involved in the process, but I think bring that as a strength, right? Go in, ask questions, find the people that are willing to help. The partnerships, whether they be formal or informal, advisors, mentors, other founders, that's the network that can really make you succeed because they've gone through parts of this or are thinking about similar things. And then I think the other thing that really stands out is find something that is a dream for you, and not just a dream in the you think about it and you fawn over the idea, but something that you can contextualize into an image or an emotional response. Because at 2 a.m. when you're sending that last email, you're going to need to be able to invoke that emotional response. And I think that for me, there's a very distinct image that I have of two spacecraft docking together, and I can pull that image up and tears come to my eyes immediately. And so that's why I say find that thing that drives you and kind of contextualize it so that you have that as your superpower.
Do you have any social media handles? Do you have, and where can people find you? Where can people follow you?
Yeah, so the website is one of the entrance points. We're pretty active on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. And as part of our upcoming announcement, we're really going to kind of blow the doors off of what we're actually been pretty secretive about for the last few months and years. And so it'll be exciting to get more active in the community with sharing what we're up to and some of the details we're working on.
And remember, guys, that you can also find more information, interesting articles, interesting interviews just like this one, directly on our website, controlhub.com/builder-nation. We would love to hear from you. And once again, Trevor, thank you so much for taking the time. Super excited to hear your announcement tomorrow. And hopefully we'll get to connect soon.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being on here.